This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Oh, thanks for downloading this podcast. Did that sound patronising or too grateful? Anyway, it's a new Confessions podcast from Radio 2 here where, as you know, what happens. Everyone says, I've done bad stuff, and then Bobby and Joe go, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll forgive you, but maybe we won't.
It actually sounded really sarcastic.
Did it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll start
They
again.
might not believe you.
Should I do it again?
It's fine. No, you've done it now.
I can start again and be more sincere.
No, I don't think you could be more sincere.
Okay.
This week's confession collection includes, we have Jack's confession in the pair tonight, Bruce's tale, Hooked on a Screaming, John's shameless story, Shake Your Bale Feather, and a classic confession from the crypt featuring a vulnerable fox and a mischievous boy called Andy.
But first we start with this confession, which we've called Jim Slips, Lamps and Teas. I know, impressive, huh?
Please be seated.
This one comes from Baz. And I think you're going to like this one. Father Simon and the Collective of Considerate Clerics. That's you guys. Ooh. Back in the early 1970s, I was a mere 12-year-old at a large comprehensive that was in the midst of a major upgrade project. Temporary classrooms, built in the immediate post-war period, were gradually being demolished and replaced before they fell down of their own accord. To call some of them rickety would be an enormous understatement, and we all felt there was a danger of our rooms collapsing at any time. We were temporarily occupying a chemistry lab as our classroom during this reconstruction period, and we were taught by Miss Reese, who was barely out of school herself and was clearly more than a little nervous. She would frequently react in exaggerated ways to sudden noises, with a lot of jumping and arm waving and a selection of Welsh words used to punctuate her lessons if something unexpected happened. At this point I should mention that attached to the wall behind the lab's workbench was a roller blackboard. You might remember this, a continuous green plastic loop that stretched from the floor to about a metre below the ceiling. On this board, teachers could obviously write stuff, and by scrolling up and down were able to refer to previous notes. Now, on top of this board, for no apparent reason, sat an angle-poised lamp. When the door to the classroom slammed, the lamp rocked for a few seconds, then regained its stationary position. My friend Mick and I spotted this and came up with a cunning plan. Wouldn't it be fun if the lamp were to fall off and land with a crash behind Miss Reese? What a laugh it would be to see her jump about and react in such an extreme and animated way in surprise as the lamp exploded with a big crash behind her. If only the lamp were a bit nearer the edge, and if only someone would slam the door at the right time. So, what could happen here? The following morning, we got to school early, and by a combination of piling up science room stools and a box on top of each other, we were able to reach the top of the blackboard and move the lamp closer to the front of the ledge. What larks. During registration, we sat full of anticipation, and although twice the lamp rocked when the door was slammed, it didn't fall. Registration ended with the lamp still in place, and as we trudged off to our first lesson, we cursed our bad luck. And then, unexpectedly, the first lesson of the afternoon was switched from its normal science lab to our own temporary classroom. We were never told why, nor why Mr. Harris had not taken the lesson. Instead, we spotted with considerable foreboding that we had a Scottish maths teacher standing in, who I shall call Mr. MacLeod.
Quite stern and strict and shouty, I'm
guessing. I think you got that right. Mr. MacLeod was an older gentleman who, like several of the more mature teachers at the school, had seen service during the Second World War. He was an abrasive character who marched around the school and seemed to enjoy treating his students as if part of an army battalion. On the day of this sorry deed, Mr. MacLeod stood in front of the class and began scribbling things on the blackboard and barking questions at the students. When one boy couldn't answer, Mr. MacLeod bellowed at him, "I've already gone through this, boy!" As I said, he was obviously Scottish. This is my Scottish accent. "Why weren't you listening?" The teacher then turned and roughly yanked down part of the blackboard to reveal notes made earlier. As he turned back to the class, his face becoming red with frustration, we saw the lamp rock backwards, and then forwards, and then it toppled off. Instead of the lamp landing with a crash behind Miss Reese, as we had meticulously planned, the lamp fell in slow motion and hit Mr. MacLeod on the back of his head.
No.
The impact drew an adjective I hadn't heard a teacher utter before, and then Wholly unexpectedly, it caused his left eye to shoot out of its socket, bounce loudly on the workbench, and land in the lap of a visibly shocked Ginny Green.
No way.
Hello, Ginny. Chaos ensued as Ginny screamed and then fainted, passing out completely, and fell to her right, clattering the girl next to her, who in turn knocked the student next to her, and in a domino effect, 7 girls ended up in a heap on the floor. Mr. McLeod raced around the workbench, ignored the girls, and gathered his eye, which was rolling around towards the door. He quickly rinsed the eye under the tap and slipped it back into its socket without anyone seeing how he did it.
No!
He was rubbing the back of his head and fluently cursing as he stepped over the shrieking girls and returned to his post behind the workbench. Mr. McLeod kicked the broken lamp in rage and glared at the shocked students just as a concerned head of year, Mr. Ryan, came into the room to find out what on earth the noise had been. Once he'd restored order, he helped the girls stand up and sent the now awake but deathly pale Ginny to see the school nurse before gently suggesting to Mr. McLeod that he did the same. And so, obviously, Father Simon, I seek forgiveness not from Mr. McLeod, who was a ferocious and frightening teacher, the likes of which would not be allowed within 10 miles of a school these days, nor do I seek forgiveness from the girls who ended up on the floor, as it was quite funny to watch. I do seek forgiveness from Mr. Ryan, who turned up to the following morning's registration period and had great difficulty keeping his composure when explaining to us that Mr. McLeod had been injured in Normandy whilst fighting for his country and that we should be more respectful of a war hero. When he said that he lost his eye in the battle for Caen, you could see him struggling not to say, and he nearly lost it again. Mr. Ryan concluded without bursting into laughter, but only just, and I now seek forgiveness for my sins because none of it was intended, as you can probably gather. Well,
Can Bobby go first this time?
Yeah.
there's
okay.
certainly an element of the sitcom there, as the lamp didn't fall behind Miss Reese, but on top of Mr. McLeod, which they never intended. You know, the voice that I would like to be able to have done is the voice on Pink Floyd's The Wall, where they have a very, very animated Scottish teacher, who I think is Roger Waters, actually doing a Scottish accent, saying, you've got to eat your vegetables. Anyway, that's the voice that I would like to be, but I can't do it. Anyway, Bobby, yes, go on.
No, you can't be forgiven, Baz. I see, the thing is about schoolroom hijinks, they're not meant to cause any serious problem. You know, smelly noises, smelly things, noises, but missiles, no, that can knock somebody's eye out. I actually thought you were talking about a real eye then. I had missed the point that it was a false
It's
one,
a
and
false
I
eye, yes.
was quite
I don't
terrified
think a
because you just
normal
never
eye
know.
would have,
well,
would have
you'd hope
behaved
not,
like
but you
that.
just never know the angle of the lamp and all that. I mean, no, you can't be forgiven. This is not good enough.
I'm amazed that an eye would shoot out like that. And also, if you just kind of scramble to pop it back in, surely there'd be all kinds of bacteria and
He
dust
rinsed it.
and hair.
He
Did he rinse it?
Yeah,
Did I
he
miss
did
that bit?
rinse it, yeah.
Oh, okay. Right, I was worried about
You
that
can
bit.
just imagine the Ginny fainting and then
Yes.
7 other girls fainting as well.
The domino effect. No, you can't possibly forgive this kind of behaviour because, again, it's kind of bullying on a certain scale because Miss
think?
Reese would have had, not fair on her at all. So, no, not forgiven at all, Baz.
The Confessions Podcast.
Anyway, here comes tonight's confession, and it's from Jack. My story is from 1971, when I was around 14 years of age. I lived in a small village in the southwest of England. Like most small villages, it had little in the way of recreational activities for the youth to do in the evening, so we spent most of our time finding things to spice things up. We had many devious schemes and pranks to annoy the local villagers, and being such a small village, the main excitement was in not getting caught or recognised, and for us that meant donning balaclavas during the more risky of these schemes. Bobby already looking disapproving.
Ill-advised.
Yeah, and pretty dodgy 1971 as well as now. My confession is about one of these seasonal adventures which I'm sure is known to pretty much most of your listeners, and that is the art and the delight of scrumping. Not just apples, though, in our case. We were scrumping plums, cherries, and even figs. But this occasion is about pears. Specifically, the vicar's pears that were from his magnificent pear tree in the front garden of his vicarage. Again, we're entering sitcom territory now, as we contemplate the vicar's magnificent pear tree and the temptation therein. On this one evening, we managed to get a good haul before we heard a shout from our lookout Sarah say, "Vicar's coming!" By the way, I should say that although there's a stereotype here, the voice of the vicar will be that of the Reverend Timothy Farthing from Dad's Army. Because that's got a stereotypical vicar's voice. I apologise to all vicars. Vicar's coming. We could see the light coming from the open side door as well, so we legged it, and we then went off to divvy up and eat the wonderful fruit from the vicar's garden, eventually going home stuffed and actually not feeling too well. The rest of the week was dull in comparison, and boredom soon set in, so Thursday evening we decided to go to the church youth club for once. The vicar was there, obviously, and most unusually he came over to me. He then said, "I take it that was you and your merry band that were in my garden the other evening? I'll tell the verger." Well, I couldn't lie to the vicar, could I? So I said nothing, which he rightly took to mean yes. He then said he'd like to make a deal with me. The deal was that if we didn't take any more of his pears from the tree, he'd give us a bag of pears the following week if we came to the church youth club. This, he said, would save his tree from being damaged, even though we were very careful normally and we never broke the branches. I agreed to this and promised him that we wouldn't take any more pears off the tree. The week dragged between the 2 Thursdays. It's so difficult to resist doing something when you've been told not to do it at that age. But with great willpower, we managed not to go near the vicarage. The following Thursday, we returned to the youth club and were greeted by a happy-faced vicar with, as promised, a largish carrier bag of what we presumed were his lovely pears. However, when we later opened the bag and inspected them, inside we found that they were all windfalls, crawling with insects and maggots. This obviously raised the adrenaline to a far higher level. We immediately said that we should go up and do a super raid to get our own bag. But I then realised the problem was that he had kind of kept his side of the bargain, and I had promised to leave the pears alone, so I felt morally it would be wrong to go and do a super raid in capital letters. However, because it's obviously a thing. However, as we were walking along the road, the vicar's words kept on playing around and round in my head, and suddenly, as some vicars might say, I had an epiphany. The following evening we waited for dusk and then returned to the vicarage. However, so as not to break our promise, we didn't take any fruit off the tree, but instead we ate the pears whilst they were still on the branch.
Left them hanging there.
We did this by pulling the branches down and then eating as much as we could and then pinging the branch back up. The pears tasted even lovelier than ever because they were so fresh. When the vicar came out, we legged it as before, but this time stuffed with the fruit instead of having pockets and shirts filled to the brim. Perhaps he initially thought he'd saved his fruit before we could pick them, but in the cold light of day, he realised he'd been counter-duped by his nemesis as we'd eaten the pears whilst they were still on the branches. So before I ask for forgiveness, I should point out that the vicar did eventually get his own back on us, in not one but 2 ways. Firstly, by putting a water sprinkler into the tree and switching them on whenever we came back scrumping. We were not amused with that. And then on another occasion we were duped when we went to the vicar for Bob a job, if you remember that. The first job was to weed the whole of his back garden, and the second was to wash his car, both of which we did with diligence, spending the whole day there from 10 until 5, and at the end of the day we were completely shattered, especially as the vicar hadn't brought us anything to drink or eat the whole day, and then he just gave us a shilling. He gave us the bob, he just gave us 5p between us. Revenge was clearly sweet for the vicar, though you thought he might have been slightly more generous in his heart. Now, all these years later, I would very much like to ask for forgiveness. I haven't been able to look at a pear or a vicar since. At that time of my life where I'd like to start eating pears and talking to vicars again, because you never know when you're going to need a vicar as you look to the future.
Yes.
Anyway, so quite ingenious, I think. All they did is they promised not to take any fruit from the tree. So they didn't. So they stuck to the letter of the law. What do you say, Joe?
Well, this is kind of like a tale of Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, isn't it? Like nemesis.
Yes.
There's a bitter war going on between the two, with Scrumpy Jacks, I think we should call him, and then the vicar, who was a provocative kind of vicar. He was goading, I think. So I think maybe the vicar was not entirely blameless here. So I'm going to forgive Jack, because I think I'm quite entertained by the idea of this bitter war being waged between them. It's only a silly little war, but it's quite funny. So yeah, I'm going to forgive Jack. That's
Here
fine.
are your apples and some maggots. What do you say, Joe? What do you say? You've already spoken. What do you say, Bobby?
I don't forgive. I think the vicar actually was quite good. Look, he runs a youth club for you, gives you somewhere to go. He said, please don't steal my pears. They're not your pears. They're not running wild pears, are they? They're not growing there and you're just helping themselves. They're his pears. And they might be to be shared between everyone. And what you've done is been greedy. And he said, please, he did a bargain with you. Windfalls are fine.
No, but he gave them manky pears.
You just have to cut them out. Stop being so fussy. You spoilt kids of the 1970s. So, Jack, no, you are not forgiven. And also, I'm quite with the vicar. I love the fact they only gave you a shilling and you did all that work for him. That's payback. I like this vicar.
Do you think anyone scrumps anymore?
I was going to ask the same thing.
You'd be so excited that your kids are actually eating fruit and vegetables that you go, yes, carry on.
Yeah. No, I doubt very much whether it really happens. I would love somebody to come and take the pears off my tree.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When?
You're welcome anytime. Well, not now.
Be careful what you wish for.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Jack's confession in the pear tonight, where he stole some magnificent pears from the vicar's tree. Most of you forgave Jack, but some were more concerned with my vicar's accent rather than the actual confession.
Regarding a confession, Scrumpy Jack definitely forgiven. The vicar had a mean streak. By the way, the vicar's voice sounded like the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And Rich says sounded like Ebenezer Scrooge rather than Reverend Timony. So the scariest vicar voice ever. They weren't wrong, I don't think.
Do you think?
No.
I was doing my best.
Should we listen? Should we just inflict it on other people? Children, be afraid.
I take it that was you and your merry band that were in my garden the other evening.
I can feel it in my bones. There are children here somewhere.
You know what that sounds like? When you haven't had your chamomile tea.
So it was me and then the child catcher.
Lollipops, children.
Oh, scary.
I take it that was you and your merry band that were in my garden the other evening.
I can feel it in my bones. There are children here somewhere.
Okay, well, it's a disturbing comparison.
When the remake
maybe.
happens of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang,
I'll be there.
coming for you.
I could do it on stage. Anyway, still to come on the podcast, we have a Cub Scout prank you don't want to miss. Kayla then took out a box of matches.
Oh, no.
What?
Of all the things that you wouldn't expect to happen, struck one and then shouted, "Run!" as he threw the lit match towards the poor resting wildlife.
Oh, my God.
All that's to come. But first, let's have a look at the parish notice board, and Joe has this.
I do. I have an email from Nicholas Lambourne. Good afternoon, Father Simon, Jubilant Joe and beautiful Bobby. Creep. I always look forward to your confessions, but never get a chance to listen to them until the podcast due to my work hours, sometimes overrunning. Also, I have to stop myself having fits of laughter at my desk every time I listen to the downloaded podcasts on my phone. I thoroughly enjoy listening to the podcast every week. I have rated you on iTunes to you, Simon, with a well-deserved 5 stars. Evidence included in attachment.
Thank you.
And love listening to a lot of classics such as the Fat Baby and the Customs and Excise Wheel Wash. Before I depart back to work, is there any hidden goodies, or are there any hidden goodies or Radio 2 tat that I could please have to help personalise my workspace? Keep up the amazing work, and I'll be saving these to eventually play to my kids when we eventually get round to having them. Ta-da!
All right, so they haven't got kids, but when they do get kids, then they'll play them. Well, you asked for some old BBC tat, but how modern and contemporary is this?
Wow.
We've never seen these. These are brand spanking new.
That's fantastic.
It's a BBC Sounds mug.
Oh, very nice.
Is it a first?
It's kind of black. So it's mainly black with orange and light blue and dark blue.
Good for hot chocolate.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. How much would you pay for one of those, Bobby?
Oh, well, £1.50 is usually my starting price for
That's
everything.
what I was going to say,
Yeah.
£1.50.
All right. Well, that's quite nice then, Nicholas Lambourne.
I'm sure they're trying to sell them for much more than that in the BBC shop, but that's all Bobby and I giving them.
That's what we think it's worth. Anyway, you'll get that. Bobby, what have you got?
Well, I've got a mini confession from Dexter, age 8 1/4, and this has been sent in with a little help from Mummy Angela. Dexter says, my confession is called Who Let the Frogs Out? Mummy asked me to put the washing out one day as she was reading with my little brother, so I did it because I like to be helpful. I was playing outside and looked under the trampoline and found a small frog. So an idea went through my mind and I ran to tell Mummy that I had something for her and that she must come outside right now. Mummy said, just a minute, Sonny's reading for me. So I went back outside, picked up a pot and ran over to the trampoline and tried to catch the frog in the pot. It was quite hard work work because the frog kept hopping away, as frogs do. When that idea failed, I decided to get the big washing basket I had just used and put the frog in there. I ran inside and told Mum she really had to come right now because I had a lovely surprise for her. Mummy came outside to have a look. I pointed at the washing basket. Mum looked in it, screamed and ran away.
Excellent.
My mum doesn't like frogs. She's absolutely terrified of them. And I knew it.
Ooh.
Dexter ate 3 1/4. No, a quarter. I know.
I think that's quite smart, isn't it? Because
Is
it's
it?
It's harmless. You know, I mean, the frog obviously isn't going to do any harm. Although you wouldn't want it on your clean washing, particularly.
The washing was out. He went down to put the washing out.
And I think the fact that I think that Angela has helped on the typing means that Mum is quite forgiving.
So do you think Dexter is on the naughty or the nice list when it comes to Santa this year? I'm just wondering, Dexter, if you're listening right now, dangerous game to be playing.
I would say because he's written to us, he's on the nice
list. Okay,
he's on
you're
the
okay.
nice list.
You're good.
Okay, I've got this tweet from Judith. I genuinely don't think I could make it through a training week without the Confessions podcast. Just need to get some waterproof headphones and maybe swimming won't be as awful. Hashtag triathlon training. Good. Are there such a thing as... Are there waterproof headphones?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've never used them, but apparently there are.
Oh, okay.
And they're great.
Well, maybe, Judith, you know exactly what to ask for Christmas. Waterproof headphones. Thank you very much.
Remember, if you want to get in touch with us or you have a confession of your own, one that made you laugh out loud, or you've just managed to sneakily subscribe your mate to the podcast and want to boast, email confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Okay, grubby part of the notice board, as we see the non-compliant confessions, how they're lining up this week. Joe, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, I will do. I'm holding Rob's story here at arm's length, though, because it's a tale of tomfoolery on a YTS scheme which involved a heavy night of drinking, a tin of vegetable soup placed beside a comatose pal, and a morning taste test which resulted in our old favourite Vomdoms, or Vomit Dominoes. I've never heard of that before.
Me
Yeah.
neither.
Vomdoms?
Vomdoms, yes, absolutely.
God.
Once-
easy now.
when one starts, the other one has to carry on.
Oh.
That's the way it goes. So from sick humour to just plain dangerous behaviour from Ralph, who, having drunkenly fallen asleep while smoking, awoke to find his mattress on fire. For reasons known only to Ralph, he ran out of the house naked with the mattress above his head. What? And put it in his dad's shed while it was still on fire. Why didn't you just run away and leave the burning mattress? Anyway, Ralph then promptly went back to sleep and awoke the next day to the noise of his dad hosing down the remainders of his shed. Unbelievably irresponsible behaviour from Ralph, and so therefore not forgiven. It's a classic tale, that is. Why would you run out of the house with a burning mattress above your head?
Well, that I
What a
understand,
fool.
to get the fire out. What I don't understand is then taking the fire into the shed.
You
That
put the
makes no
fire
sense.
out before you...
Depends. Sometimes maybe that's your thinking, that's your logic. I'm not saying it's a recommended thing to do, but I can understand.
Crazy behaviour.
Next one, onwards, we have a Busy Mummy's Tale, which is about her husband, and it's frankly so graphic, we can't even begin to relay it to you, other than to say vasectomy, swelling, scarf, and a distinct lack of sympathy from Busy Mummy. Do you get that? Everyone's concentrating really hard.
So vasectomy?
Vasectomy, swelling.
Scarf?
Where would the scarf be wrapped?
I don't want to think about it.
Well,
And a distinct lack of sympathy from Busy Mummy, because obviously she's being really, really busy, and husband probably is just moaning quite a lot.
I found that very disturbing. Similarly with Nick's disgusting confession, we can only really give you the line, the result was a curtain of poo, pulp and water being driven up into the air. That's the only line which we can use, and we leave the rest to your imagination.
And rounding off this roll call of shame is Sarah's story of medical student silliness, in which Sarah and her friends mixed a dose of laxative into a cake for some of the boys on the course.
No, that's not good.
Well, they laughed quite a lot until it became apparent that 5 days later the boys were still ill. This is after 5 days, and now bleeding from somewhere you couldn't put a plaster. Obviously she's meaning from the eyes or something like that. That's bad.
Well, at least we got to one where I can understand why we didn't broadcast it on the air. And in general, as a guideline, though it's frankly pretty much too late, if it's involving laxatives, it doesn't get on. Because there are so many that as soon as you mention laxatives, there are loads and loads who thought it would be really wacky and really funny just to sprinkle a bit of laxative in someone's food. And that is not funny.
No,
Ever.
ever.
Thank you. So none of those are okay. confessions@bbc.co.uk is the email.
Okay, so we go back to this week's confessions next, and we have John's straw shame story, which is called Shake Your Bale Feather.
The Confessions Podcast.
This one comes from John. Thank you, John. Father Simon, I beg absolution. I labour under a terrible burden of guilt which I have carried for more than half a century. Ooh. I was a 19-year-old would-be agricultural student doing my year's practical farm experience. My parents found a friend of a friend of a friend who farmed near Felsted in Essex, and he agreed to take me on, even after it was explained that I knew next to nothing about farming. On the day that these sad events unfolded, I had been working on the farm for a couple of months and felt that I was now a proper farm worker. So when the farmer informed me that I was to help load a lorry with straw bales, I was full of the confidence that you would expect from an experienced farm worker. I could pitch small bales till the cows came home. The lorry arrived and I directed the driver as he backed up to the haystack. Then he climbed down and looked at me. I looked at him. There were just the two of us. "Okay," I said. "I'll pitch and you stack." "Eh?" he replied. "I'll pitch and you... What?" I explained it again, but his expression still indicated that as far as he was concerned, I might as well have been speaking in a foreign language. It turned out that I might have been because, one, the driver had never carried a load of straw before. Two, he had never collected any kind of load from any farm ever. And three, actually, he'd never driven a lorry before because he's actually a bus driver. Okay. Also, there was some urgency because the reason he was driving a lorry today was in order to earn an extra bit of money for his honeymoon because, get this, he was getting married at 3 o'clock on this particular day. And it was now getting on for 11 o'clock.
Right.
So he's trying to earn some extra money by driving a lorry on the day that he's getting married. He said, "Can't you load if I pitch?" I'd seen it done, to be honest, but I'd never actually done it before. I gave him a quick explanation. The secret was to have all the outside bales leaning inwards. This is a very Kirsty Allsop style confession. Leaning inwards right up to the top of the stack, and then the weight of the top layer would lock everything into place like a three-dimensional jigsaw. At least I think that was the idea. As I say, I'd never done it. So we started work. He pitched while I stacked, and of course we chatted as we worked. He told me all about his fiancée and the wedding. I think the honeymoon was going to be in Great Yarmouth. He explained he'd worked it all out. As long as he left by 12:30, he would just have enough time to dump the lorry at the haulage depot, rush home for a quick change, and be at the church for 3 o'clock. I stacked as fast as I could. I did not want him to be late for his wedding. We all got it done in time. We lashed it down nice and tight with proper wagoner's hitches and everything. I wished him good luck for the future, and he climbed up into the cab, fired up the big diesel, and lurched out of the farm gate. I say lurched because years of heavy machinery driving in and out of the farm had made a large pothole on one side of the gateway. When it got too bad, we put a barrow load of hardcore into it and drove a tractor backwards and forwards to tamp it down. But it was a while since we'd done that. Now, you can tie a load of straw bales onto a flatbed lorry very securely with a good wagoner's hitch, which I had learned from working on the farm. However, if the whole structure is fundamentally unstable, because it's been stacked by somebody who is, let's say, doing it for the first time ever, and whose entire expertise is based on seeing someone else do it once, then the laws of physics will take over. As he drove over the pothole, the weight of the offside bales began to shift. Once some of the near side bales had fallen out, those previously constrained by the rope were free to ooze into the gap left behind. I say ooze, which is an odd word to use when describing something as dry as straw, but it seemed to me that I was watching the unfolding disaster in slow motion. One by one, they all toppled, some bursting as they fell, others crashing onto the road and going off like big golden bombs.
Oh, no.
While we both looked at the mess that laid in front of us, my boss arrived in his little grey Renault 4L. He stopped and handed me my pay packet and said, "Right, it's 12:30, you can go home for the weekend." I began, and I gestured mumbling at the pile of loose straw which was now piled up and entirely blocking the road. The farmer says, "It's out of the farm gate. It's not your problem. It's not mine either. In you get." And with a nod to my new friend the driver, he drove me back into the farmyard. I returned to my caravan where I was able to change back into my groovy 60s gear, jump into my Mini and head back to London, where I belonged. So, subsequently, I have spent the whole of the rest of my life wondering what happened. How did the bus driver get it cleared up? He couldn't get it back on the lorry. How long did it take? He was due at church at 3 o'clock. Did he miss his wedding altogether? Did the honeymoon in Great Yarmouth never happen? Have I ruined somebody's life just because I learnt to tie a wagoner's hitch? I have a horrible feeling, says John, that I need a whole load of forgiveness. So that's it. So we actually don't know what happened.
Oh, no.
We actually don't know what, unless, of course, someone else knows the other half of that story, and the guy who drove the lorry is listening, or families, friends and relatives. But you would think, John, that maybe, given that all you have to do is to climb into your cool and groovy 60s gear and go off into town, that maybe you'd have stayed around to help out.
Surely he would have done that.
Just
this doesn't
a little
ring true.
bit.
No, that's just bizarre.
So there's this guy.
He's properly running away.
He's blocked the road with straw, and John has run away.
I'd imagine the lorry driver ran away as well. You wouldn't miss your wedding. You wouldn't miss your wedding, would you? You wouldn't.
I don't.
Or be late for your wedding. Well, I was. But anyway, I'm generally quite a long time.
How late were you?
Quite a while.
A day?
Not quite there.
How late were you?
It might have been nearly an hour, possibly.
What were you
I know
doing?
the organist was resorting to playing lots and lots of different tunes.
Were you
I do
arguing-
like to be beside the seaside, that kind of thing.
Were you arguing about someone who hadn't made your tea correctly? Is that what it was?
Hair and makeup,
Oh, okay.
something like that.
Always a
Usual
problem.
stuff, yeah.
Anyway, do you forgive John or not?
Do I forgive? Yes, because I don't think he particularly did anything really wrong. But then he did run away. No, maybe he did. Yeah, okay.
He
okay.
ran away and
no,
left
I do
the
not
guy
forgive.
who might
No.
miss his marriage. Apart from that,
No, I do not forgive him. That's right.
Bobby Pryor.
What do you think? I mean, look, the thing to do would have gone, thanks for my pay packet, here's my Mini, you go and get yourself changed and get yourself to your
That's
wedding.
the farmer's Mini.
Yeah, no, it's his Mini, isn't
has he
it?
got a
Yeah,
Mini?
he can go off back to London. Go and get yourself to your wedding. I will sort this out somehow. I'll find some people, even if he has to load it by himself, which he can do because he's got all day to kill. And then at some point we need to get this lorry to the yard. I think it's unforgivable. John, 50 years. You've been struggling for 50 years. You've got another 50 years to struggle with. You are not forgiven. I'm very cross with you. What thing to do to drive away from trouble like this?
The Confessions Podcast.
Right, here we go. Here comes another confession. Gather round. This one comes from Bruce. Well, we're calling him Bruce anyway. Simon, Joe and Bobby, this dates to 1975 and I'm 14 and I'm spending a school holiday with my Scottish cousin Doug. As was often the case with us two, on this particular evening we were bored. Not old enough to go out socialising, but too old to play out. So we decided to make our own fun down by the river. We figured it might be funny to scare people walking along the riverbank, and Doug hit upon a brainwave. We need something that looks like a small furry animal, he said. So we thought about it for a while, and after a couple of minutes, I said, what about the fur from the hood of a parka? That looks a bit like an animal. Perfect, but who would be daft enough to take the trim off their parka hood? Doug pointed out, not unreasonably. Well, I say, helpfully, my brother's getting a new parka tomorrow because he's outgrown his old one. He won't mind. So after tracking down my brother's old parka, we cut the fur off the hood, without asking him, and made our way down to the river. Carefully preparing our trap, we fed a fishing line under the railings alongside the river, up the banking that overlooked the footpath, over 2 telegraph wires above, and back down to where we connected the 2 ends of the line together to form a large loop and attached our foot-long, mysterious furry creature. Our plan was perfect. By pulling the fishing line, we could make the creature run away from the river across the footpath and then back the other way. The whole thing worked perfectly. Now we needed to find a hiding place and wait for some unsuspecting victims. Sounds like an episode of Roger the Dodger. We positioned ourselves amongst shrubbery, up the banking, and waited, holding tightly to our fishing line. As the light faded, we knew that soon people would be either going for their evening strolls with their dogs or making their way to the pub. What we didn't expect was a group of about 20 Cub Scouts and their scoutmaster, dressed in full attire and cub regalia, walking down the river path on a nature-spotting outing. The temptation was too much, and as the pack got closer to where our creature was lying dormant, we pulled the fishing line, making the creature move quickly across the path, up the banking towards us, and the cover of the shadows. Arcala, there's something just run across the path, said the Cub Scout at the front of the pack. The Arcala of the group sprang into action and told the boys to stand back while he investigated. But as he did so, we quickly pulled the line in the opposite direction, forcing the creature to shoot back across the path and under the railing. As Arcala took his torch out and moved closer to inspect the strange creature, we thought it best to keep it moving, so we pulled the line in the opposite direction, dragging it back across the path towards him and up the banking. Arcala jumped backwards, clearly shaken by our horrific creature. "Right, lads," he says, "I think it's gone." So we promptly sent it back across again towards the railings. In fact, we did this 2 or 3 times, barely suppressing our giggles, as Arcala tried to capture the so-called creature in his torchlight. The Cub Scouts behind him huddled closer together for comfort. "OK, boys, don't worry," he says in his not very calming tone. "It's only wildlife, and any Cub Scout worth his salt knows what to do in this situation. Line up, boys, and on my command, one pair at a time, you do as I say." I know they're in Scotland, but this is the way this particular Cub Scout leader is speaking. Unsure what was going to happen next and desperately trying not to scream with laughter, we stopped pulling the line, leaving the parka trim lying dormant by the side of the path. Much to our horror, Arcala then... This is where it takes an unexpected turn. What do you think he's going to do?
Stamp on it.
Yeah, do something really... Yeah.
Do something really...
Killing, like...
Okay. Well, you're kind of right there. Arcala then took out a box of matches.
Oh, no.
What?
Of all the things that you wouldn't expect to happen, struck one and then shouted, "Run!" as he threw the lit match towards the poor resting wildlife.
Oh, my gosh.
With discipline any army would be proud of, the first 2 cubs ran past our lure, screaming as they went. "Run!" shouts Arcala as he struck another match, and 2 more cubs ran past our creature, screaming. I think what he's trying to do is just keep it at bay. Thinking this was hilarious, we pulled the fishing line to prevent our plot being foiled or set fire to, and it took at least a dozen matches before all the cubs were safely past. Then, in a gesture of defiance, Arcala struck another match before running like Basil Fawlty past the crazed creature, dashing backwards and forwards across the path. He hasn't really got to the main forgiveness bit yet, by the way.
Oh.
Father Simon, I don't ask forgiveness for frightening a pack of Cub Scouts who were looking for creatures anyway, and for testing the survival skills of Arcala. Instead, I ask for forgiveness, this is going right back to the beginning, from my brother, for removing the fur from the hood of his parka and subjecting him to years of ridicule from his peers. Now, you might think that we said at the beginning, he's getting a new one. Well, says Bruce, that's why I need to ask for forgiveness from my parents, because it was the new one that I'd vandalised, not realising that my parents had bought it for him earlier than planned and had thrown out the old one, the one I'd meant to cut up. So the furry trim was brand new furry trim, and it wasn't old furry trim, and that's what the monster was that was terrorising the good Cub Scout. I still think it's a strange thing to start throwing lit matches at the poor animal.
I guess the idea was, like cave people used to brandish lit torches just to scare off the
saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah, saber-toothed tigers. It's that kind of thing, but with a little match.
Yeah.
Pathetic.
So, forgiven or not?
No, not forgiven because of the coat. Oh my gosh. Speaking as somebody who quite likes new clothes and new coats and anything, and when you're young, to get your new coat, it means the world and it's really exciting. You can't wait to wear it. And so he would have been super, super excited. So to have it vandalised like this, can't possibly forgive. That's a terrible thing.
Subjecting him to the ridicule of his peers for many years, Bobby Pryor.
Yeah, and your mum and dad had to pay out for that and couldn't afford another one. So you're definitely not forgiven. I was thinking that you would inherit the old one. It was you would be without the fur. But no, that does not happen. I think it's quite inventive, though. But those scouts, that scout leader, actually, not the scouts. Scout leader, not forgiven.
It's a strange thing. Obviously, it's the only thing you could think of to keep this terrifying monster at bay was to throw matches. But obviously, don't try that at home, kids. And also, don't chop the fur off your brother's parka.
No, don't do that.
The Confessions Podcast.
A confession from Bruce's, which we called Hooked on a Screaming. So this kind of prank actually seems to be quite popular. Here's what one unscrupulous correspondent on the People's Verdict told us. Richard says, "Forgiven took me back to my childhood. We did a similar thing, carefully transferring fresh cow pats to the pathway and then covering with newly mown grass and then hiding in a bush. Marvellous."
Now, this is just a guess, but I would imagine that neither Joe or Bobby would have done anything like that. And if they would have had lots of friends, but would not have tried to scare their friends. Joe, did you ever scare your friends?
No.
Bobby,
No.
did you ever scare your friends?
Never scared my friends. It's not the kind of thing you'd do.
No. Did you?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I let off some stink bombs, but Everyone's done that.
Not
not us.
Just because you've done it doesn't mean everyone's done it.
Just a little glass.
It's disgusting.
Everything smells of eggs. It's terrific.
Not only that, it ruins the idea of eggs.
Anyway, that's it for this week's batch of confessions. Confessions at bbc.co.uk. But frankly, we are inundated and swamped, so yours had better be darn good. Don't go anywhere just yet, because it's time to dig out a confession from the crypt. What have we got here?
This week's has been requested by Gary from Conwy, who says, Dear Simon, Joe and Bobby, I've been meaning to put in this request for a confession from the archive for a while, so with time running out, I've got my act together. One evening I heard this classic confession. I have to say, it cut me deep, causing me to write in with my own verdict. My message was read out, and I think Simon even added beforehand that I was speaking for the country with my verdict. Shortly after, I received a few texts from friends who must have recognised Gary from Conwy and my rant about the disrespect people have for museums and their property. Anyway, the confession that I'd like to hear aired around March or April 2016 and involved a music awards ceremony at a museum where two participants decided to play a cheeky prank with an Arctic fox that lived there. Thanks in advance. I'd love to hear it one more time before you go. Gary Eisenhower in Conwy in North Wales.
OK, so just for you, Gary, here is your confession from the crypt, which is called, as you're about to hear, Jet.
The Confessions Podcast.
Dear Father Simon and the collective, I would like to apologise to all the school children and many tourists who went to visit the Commonwealth Institute in Kensington in London in the mid-70s. That sounds like a lot of kids, to be honest. At the time, says Andy, my mate Martin and I were in a band called Jet, hence the title of tonight's confession.
Okay.
Jet!
Yeah.
Signed to CBS, and we were invited to a private event at the Institute showcasing some of CBS's possible new signings. Most of the evening was spent standing next to a big cheese of CBS UK, let's call him Dick, who seemed to know absolutely nothing about music. Surely that can't be right. He kept asking us what we thought of each artist or band that appeared,
brilliant.
to which we would say, nah, it's not very good. She's rubbish.
Yep.
Nah, not very good. And then he would nod and say, yeah, you're right. Occasionally he would mutter apprehensively in his New York drawl, oh,
Hey, brilliant.
hey, I really like them.
What?
They're smart. I like them. And then wait for a positive response from us. Nah, not very good. We'd say. Yeah. Hey, yeah, you're right. I see that now.
Hot diggity dog.
He didn't say that, but if I'd thought about that, he might have said, yes, hot diggity dog, I think you're right. Anyway, this is a by and by, as we were getting a little bit bored by all this and decided to go exploring. We ventured up some stairs and through doors that we weren't meant to go through. Finally, we found ourselves in a huge, dimly lit hall like a mini museum. Here were displayed the artefacts from all the countries in the Commonwealth. Each side room with its exhibit showed stuffed animals and birds in their natural habitats with an informing caption at the front. After passing various marsupials and an aardvark, we came upon Canada with its snowy scene and an Arctic fox. The caption at the front read, "Can you spot the Arctic fox? It's wonderfully camouflaged with its white fur." Well, we stared at it for a few minutes in the dim light. In fact, it wasn't that hard to see because it was at the back in the fluffy white fake snow. Well, we thought about it and we agreed it had to be done. So I stepped over the security rope into the snowy exhibit and I retrieved Foxy. Martin looked sheepishly around and stuffed it into his coat. We then retraced our steps back down a stairwell and past a large waste bin where Foxy just seemed to fit, so that's where he went. Returning to the auditorium and Dick, we helped unsign a few more bands before we went home. Andy is clearly in a destructive frame of mind at this point. Some weeks later, and being nearby to Kensington, Martin suggested that we pop back to the Institute. In the upper hall of the Commonwealth... In the upper hall of the Commonwealth exhibits, there were many school children with their teachers and a bevy of Japanese tourists, and they all seemed to be around the Canada site. It now seemed to be the star exhibit. Children were straining over the rope, looking bemused. Japanese tourists were muttering to each other. "There it is," said Martin loudly, pointing to the big empty space at the back. "There's the fox." I picked up on this instantly. "Oh, yes, I can see," as we passed the non-existent fox exhibit. The children and the tourists leaned in, straining their eyes. Our sighting was picked up by others. "Oh, yeah, I can see it. Now, silly me, it's just over there, look, by the twigs." And so on and so on. Countless people went past pretending to see the non-existent fox, which we knew had been in the bin just a few weeks before. So clearly, says Andy, and I think he's probably not quite as contrite as he should be, I ask for forgiveness from all the school children and many others who have tried so hard for I don't know how long to spot that wonderfully camouflaged white furry Arctic fox. The reason you can't see it, kids, is because it's not there. I think he's mocking. I think Andy's going to be in for a rough ride here. I'm just checking because everyone's favourite moral perspective comes from Sister Bobby, who's now going to speak for the nation.
If I speak for the nation. Thing is, willful destruction that has no real kind of humorous, lovely end. I'm not up for. If you'd have hidden the fox somewhere, I don't know.
Hid it in the bin.
Well, hid it in the French bit or
It could have
whatever.
looked quite cute with its head.
It's a
Because actually foxes spend quite a lot of time in bins. So actually, let's just work this one out. So maybe you could say that it was more realistic because as years have gone on and man has encroached onto the Arctic fox's natural habitat, that actually they take refuge in bins, and some of them have been known to live in bins. And so therefore, when he put it in the bin, he was actually just predicting the future.
Yeah. Fox has been at your bins again, have they?
Yeah, with a few fast food packages. I'm with you, Simon, on that, if that's your opinion.
It's a symbol of man's exploitation
the
of
thing
the
is,
wild.
He basically just threw it in the bin, and that's not what's on. He would have hidden
He
somewhere.
did that,
Yeah.
but subconsciously.
No, he threw it in the bin. There wasn't a display. There
He was
wasn't
an
a
eco-warrior.
There wasn't a chicken box by the side of it, was it? Was there?
I don't know.
You know, and a boom box by the side of the fox, you know.
Well,
Urban foxes, no. So the answer is willful destruction, absolutely no point. And I thought, actually, when you talk about Jet, I thought you were talking about the Jets, the rockabilly band from the 90s. Different band, just Jet.
I think it's a completely different band. But I think Andy could be an eco-warrior, and maybe he was making a point.
He's not. Who is emptying the bins at this place and didn't spot that there's an Arctic fox in the bin? Didn't think that's not supposed to be in the bin. Maybe I should take it out of the bin.
He thought it was an art exhibit.
No. The person emptying the bins, there is the real culprit here, who should have spotted that there was an Arctic fox in the bin and should have taken it out.
It's the bin person's
It's the bin person's fault there, very much. And also these people who have been staring at this scene and expecting to see an Arctic fox. It very much is Emperor's New Clothes, a bit like those things that we all were supposed to be looking at in the 90s. Those sort of collection of coloured dots that were supposed to be. Yeah, there's supposed to be like dolphins jumping out. There was never anything there. No one, but everyone was going, oh yes, I can see the spaceship and the
magic
dolphins.
The magic eye things.
Yeah, never anything there. And well, I never saw anything.
Oh, well,
but I didn't. I was very much speaking for the reasonable people when I said that I couldn't see anything. So very much this is backed me up. So I am going to forgive because it's all down to the guy who empties the bins.
Right. Nicely worked out, by the way.
It was.
It's the people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Andy, yes or no, for his act of eco-warriorism? Or just vandalism?
The Confessions Podcast.
That was your confession from the crypt this week from Andy, which we call Jet, featuring brother Matt and sister Bobby in there. And really, it's unforgivable, isn't it? Because if you start fiddling around with a museum exhibit and hiding it, I mean, I get what the gag is. You know, or it's hardly possible to see it because it's so well camouflaged.
Yeah, but you were quite naughty because you were quite supportive of the action, which I was completely wrong. And you don't often get involved.
Who
but
knows?
you had an answer for it that seemed wrong in my eyes, but right in yours.
I think that whole thing about him being an eco-warrior is nonsense.
Can I just say, this band Jet, I know this band Jet. I don't know them personally, but they came from Northampton. And I'm pretty sure they came from Northampton. And they were one of like the big sensations in Northampton at the time. So I remember they were really famous and everyone was very excited that they were signed to a label and they were going to be big megastars. So yeah, it's quite funny hearing
And now
about
they're
them.
up to no good.
I think they're still gigging. Do you know that?
Really?
Yeah, I think they're considerably older.
Tell us about the Arctic fox then,
Yes.
Jet.
If you have a request for a vintage confession, send us over the details, any details you remember, to confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our very best to dig them out.
And if you made it to the end of the last podcast, we asked you to tweet the phrase "the naked ladybird lady." So thanks to Nigel, Lynn, Kerry, Ed, and all the others who tweeted that. This week's code phrase is about to be cited by Joe Wiley.
Let's do what a wally, because it's such an old-fashioned and really funny and silly phrase. Let's do what a wally.
Did you ever go to gigs where they used to shout "Wally" for no apparent reason
Yeah.
from the back? Do you ever remember that?
No,
Wally.
I remember being in a fish and chip shop and someone saying, "Can I have a wally?" And of course, that's another name for a gherkin. Is that the same?
No,
Of course it
not
is.
at all. Anyway, but it's a very entertaining story. It's another showbiz anecdote. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's the phrase water wally.
If you have something to get off your chest, we still want to hear from you.
Just about.
Yeah, just about. So you've only got a very short space of time left sending your own confession to confessions@bbc.co.uk. As Simon said, it's got to be good.
It's got to be good. So you can subscribe to the Confessions podcast via the BBC Sounds app and catch the remaining shows. Anyway, we're live weekdays from 5. Thank you.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.
Hello, it's Ken Bruce from The Ken Bruce Show on BBC Radio 2, the home of Popmaster. Do you love a quiz? Do you know your music? Do you know your Dolly Parton from your Dua Lipa? Your Status Quo from your Simple Minds? Your Ed Sheeran from your Electric Light Orchestra? Well, if you do, I think you're going to love the Popmaster podcast, which is available now. It's your chance to hear our daily music quiz from our weekday morning show, where we test your pop knowledge over the last 50 years. To make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe to the Popmaster podcast on the BBC Sounds app. You know you want to.
Listen to more podcasts from Radio 2 by downloading the BBC Sounds app.